They don't think the way that humans do. And this, once again, going back to David Icke, what David Icke was saying just a couple of days ago, he also was referring to these beings as they, in his terminology, they operate through mind, they operate through a program, they will do whatever is expedient, they will do whatever is practical, they'll do whatever is in their own interests, and they don't have any empathy, they don't have any sympathy. It sort of fits, but behind all of that, and this is where we go back to what Ruth was saying, which is absolutely true, behind all of that, you've got some form of cycle of abuse that has made them into what they, these are tough kids on the block. We have children like that too, almost, almost. Some of them. You don't want to come near them on a dark night, you'd be better off with a crocodile. Some of them, But behind them, they've experienced something that has made them into that. They've had a tough time, and this is their response. They're trying to survive in the world that they think is unsympathetic to them. This is just their response. They're trying to solve their own problem by being in a certain way. Maybe. These reptilian characters, he says that that the difference between them and a T-Rex is that if you remember what a T-Rex looks like, they've got these little vestigial sort of. These guys have got longer arms with very dexterous fingers, so they're tool makers. You see, if you think of the evolution of a biological species, you've got to go through the tool making phase. This is why dolphins haven't evolved high technology, because they can't make tools. They've got no fingers, they've got no hands. All they can do is make noises and play complicated games and swim around in the sea. There'll never be an industrial race or an electronic race, because you've got to go through that phase by making things. And they have been through this phase of making things. They're highly intelligent, they're highly able, post-industrial, they have space flight, they have the whole thing. And what I do not know is whether these are the same as the Anunnaki. What we do know about the Anunnaki, and I had a fascinating conversation with David Icke about this. I keep on talking about David Icke because he's a reference point that many people watching this video will recognize and be familiar with. And I had a fascinating conversation with David. I was telling him all that we heard about the reptilians and the Anunnaki, and he was telling us, and it was absolutely matching totally. One of the characteristics is that when they are in contact, in physical contact, they will not reveal what they look like. They regard their appearance in a ritualistic way, or a way that has become ritualistic, as sacred. It's a little bit like you. It's part of their custom and ritual and fixed way of operating, that you cannot look at their face, or that we cannot look, or humans can't look on their face. It's not done. And Henry Deacon, Arthur Neumann, who has encountered these characters physically in the flesh, he never saw their faces because they're all wearing cloaks and headdresses and funny stuff like that. This is what they do. They're very ceremonial. It's an ancient culture which has ritual, and exactly as which has ritual deeply ingrained in everything which they do. Why not? They can do anything they like. They're aliens, And when David Icke was describing how the ritual and the status and the sense of axiomatic importance that is ascribed to royalty, the divine right of kings and all the rest of it, this all comes from the Anunnaki. This is how they regard themselves. And when you meet them, it's like meeting a king, or like meeting a queen. If we can imagine what it's like, you got to talk in a certain way, you got to avert your eyes, you got to hold your hands in a certain way, you got to approach them in a certain way, you got to do everything in a certain way, Otherwise, our source said, I don't think it was a joke. He said, if you don't do it right, you end up in the dinner plate. You know, it's like these, it's like there's a certain way that you go about all of this. You got to defer to them. You got to, But what's really, really interesting is that if this is the same group as Clay and Sean Pickering are talking about, and they describe these guys in great detail, you can see them when they're describing them. They're describing them vividly. They are subservient to this silicon-based life form. And the hypothesis is that the silicon-based life form rescued them when they destroyed their planet. So somehow they're operating symbiotically. Everything that I've said here raises a huge number of questions, and I don't have the answers to them. I don't know whether these reptilians are shapeshifters. The silicon-based race, apparently they can shapeshift, but they don't shapeshift physically. They affect the perception in the brains or the minds of the people watching. So when this source, the first time that he came across one of these things, he was with a group of people, as I remember rightly, if I remember this correctly, he was with a group of people in a room, and he was announced that he was going to have an important meeting, and he went in there with these people in this room, and he was briefed by a senior military officer for 5 minutes, until the military officer then became this big crystal. Because it wasn't a military officer at all. They thought that they were, they perceived a military officer. And what was really interesting is that all of those people in that group saw something slightly different, because this was a mental perception. They saw something, and then they were completely confused by this. They all went off into another room and compared, well, this is what I saw. What did you see? Well, he was wearing brown shoes. No, he wasn't. He was wearing black shoes. He was 2 meters tall. No, he wasn't. He was quite short. But they saw a person, and the rest of it was something to do with what they were sort of expecting. It was an individual response to something that they were being evoked to see, or evoked to sense and hear. But they can only maintain it for about 5 minutes. Then they collapse into their real state, which is a physical state. The question immediately to their source was, well, is this some kind of a hologram or an illusion or no, it's absolutely physical. They're a rock. They're a rock in a suit. It's a really weird thing. He said, they're a rock. You couldn't, it's a big crystal thing. It's straight out of some bad science fiction movie. It's not what you expect, But they have the capacity to influence how they're perceived for short periods of time. Fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating. And the reptilians, if it's the same group of reptilians, are subservient to them. The silicon-based group don't seem to hang around on planet Earth. They're out there somewhere, and nobody knows where they're from. This is another problem. They're not answering the question where they're from. They